Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you back to the Chess World Cup 2023. In this video, I'm going to cover the quarterfinals round of the open section, and we've got incredible storylines, incredible drama. We have 4 out of 8 players remaining who are from the country of India. Vidit, we have Gukesh, we have Praggnanandhaa, we have Arjun Erigaisi, Magnus, Carlsen, Fabiano Caruana, you name it, and they are there. This is going to be a sensational recap, beginning with the battle once again for the future of chess, and that battle is between none other than Magnus Carlsen and Gukesh. Gukesh is the 17-year-old who has risen to the 7th highest rated player in the world spot. And he is crushing. He is absolutely crushing in this World Cup, and Magnus is in great form as well. In this round, 3 people get knocked out. So in today's video, 3 people are going to get knocked out. Here we go. Yesterday, Magnus defeated Gukesh. Oh, and by the way, I'm obviously not in my home location. I'm actually in Los Angeles. Again, unfortunately, one of my least favorite places on the planet. But all things creators are here. And I'm here to cover PogChamps 5, which is going to be live on August the 18th. Anyway, Magnus won with black in their matchup yesterday, so now he gets to play with white, and he plays the move e4. Now, Gukesh has to beat Magnus with the black pieces. No pressure at all. So he plays the Sicilian defense, which is the most combative way to play against e4. And Magnus doesn't play for an open Sicilian, doesn't play for a closed Sicilian, doesn't play any stupid gambits. He plays c3. And this is the Alapin Sicilian with just a very clean intention of playing the move d4. Alapin Sicilian is a fantastic opening for beginners, intermediate, 28, 35 rated players as well. But as you go up the rating ladder, people play the right stuff, and the right stuff is to challenge the pawn on e4 right away, either with knight to f6 or pawn to d5. Pawn to d5 is played. Magnus takes, queen takes, and now essentially black is like laughing in your face because you can't play the move knight c3. You would love to play that move. So instead, white plays d4. Black can develop both knights here. He plays knight to f6. Magnus also develops the knight. And remember, Magnus just has to not lose, and he will make it to the semifinals. So it's up to Gukesh. Gukesh is the one that has to take the risks. He plays pawn to e6. Magnus simply developing the bishop, wants the castle. Now Gukesh takes in the center. You'll notice from his time spent, obviously he had other options. He chooses to take now. Magnus, of course, at this point could immediately go for a queen trade, trying to get a position that looks something like this, where it's a queenless game and white has what's called a queenside pawn majority. But instead he goes for the isolated pawn, isolated pawn setup. Gukesh develops, Magnus castles. Gukesh develops, Magnus develops as well, and now the queen's got to go to d6. And Magnus actually chases the queen away. Magnus doesn't have any easy development here. For example, he could just play bishop to g5, but he needs to come up with a concrete plan for these pieces. He has an isolated pawn. The person playing against the isolated pawn wants to blockade that pawn and also would like to trade pieces. So if bishops came off, knights came off, black would have a very clear target. The person playing with the isolated pawn wants to either shove it forward or use the space around it to create problems for his opponent, which is why he plays knight to b5. Now, the move knight to b5 normally is like a stupid move. It's a dopamine move. You just make a move, you attack the queen, but that's not the idea. The idea is to force the queen back and immediately follow up and develop. So now there is another threat, forcing black to make a response, which is putting his knight in the center of the board. And now bishop to g3, still eyeing the dark squares. Gukesh could play a6 at this point. For some reason, he doesn't. I guess he didn't really want his knight under fire. But even after knight c3, black could, if he really wanted to, could go back. He castles, though. And now Magnus plays rook c1. So this is the first time Magnus thought basically in the entire opening. He has, again, the isolated pawn position, and he simply brings his rook to the semi-open file. I mean, it would be an open file if this knight wasn't really in the way. But the rook is very, very comfortable here. And now, again, a6 is yet another option, but knight c3 would be played. And if knight takes, Magnus would do this so that his pawn had a friend. And friends are good. And don't be worried if you struggle to find some. Life is long. And you will one day. Unless you're a bad person, in which case results may vary. Bishop to d7 played by Gukesh, who develops. Now Magnus could already begin kind of gandering into the position. He chooses not to, though. He just backs up anyway. The knight didn't teleport. The knight was on b5. Magnus just knight c3. Folks, let's not forget, Magnus has to play for a not lose. That's what he's playing for. Magnus is not playing for a win. He doesn't have to take any risk whatsoever. He knows that his opponent at some point is going to have to run straight at him with his fists extended, which I don't know if you've ever tried to fight like this. By the way, you like my ring? It's my wedding ring. I like a bigger ring. I don't know. Have y'all ever seen my ring? Anyway, yeah, so this is a really stupid way of fighting. But that's what's going to have to happen. Gukesh plays queen b6. So Gukesh spends something like 10 minutes. Gukesh probably knows that his best move is something like rook c8, but he's like, look, I got to do something, right? Queen b6. And Magnus could now take, and it would be a double isolated pawn position. I'm actually kind of surprised he didn't do that, because that's a really nice way to kill the game. Rook c3, maybe rook b3. If takes, rook b3, queen a2, rook b7 is very menacing for black to deal with. The queen is kind of stuck, and black has this very ugly defensive task here, dealing with all this pressure. Instead of that, Magnus plays bishop c4. He also spends quite a bit of time on knight c3, and now 14 minutes on the move bishop c4. He had many other options as well. He could have played a3. He could have played a3 because, again, you can't really take this because of this and rook b1. He could have played bishop d3 and tried to go checkmate. He had a lot of options, but he chooses to play bishop c4. Same concept. Queen b2 is not possible because in this case, you would just simply win the pawn here. And now Gukesh plays knight f6, and Magnus plays knight a4, utilizing that queen's position and also defending the pawn with the knight. And now this nice idea, knight to c5. So Magnus is down 25 minutes on the clock, but he's still playing completely reasonably. He's inviting this exchange. You can't do this because I have a fork, which would be nice. And if you just take and don't take the pawn, then I'm just going to play a3 and just build up on the queen side, and I'm still going to put the bishop on d6. So instead of that, Gukesh plays bishop c8, which is desperate times call for desperate measures. Now Magnus plays a3, simply indicating that he's going to walk. And now Gukesh at this point sets up the bishop for the next game and then sets up the queen for the next game. So in the middle of the game, the bishop and the queen have returned to their home squares. You can tell that he is kind of out of ideas. And that's not an insult. That's just the difficulty of the situation that he finds himself in. I mean, the c3 Sicilian is just an equal opening, and you have to do something. So right now, Gukesh is trying to provoke Magnus. The thing is, when you are trying to play for a win with black, one of the ways to try to play for a win with black is to play slightly inaccurately. Why? Because your opponent gets an advantage. And in getting that advantage, your opponent goes, damn, I know I'm supposed to win this game because I'm better. I have an advantage. I'm supposed to push on my opponent. You know, I'm supposed to play like bishop here and put some pressure. But in doing that, you could mess something up. You could, you know, it's a very weird psychological thing when results are forced in games. The computer here at this point wanted Magnus to, again, kind of start pointing things this way. He plays bishop b5, though, queen b6, and now a4. Just slow expansion, very clearly wanting Gukesh to play this move so that he could take and either damage the structure or bring the knights and, you know, restrain this bishop severely and have a nice advantage. Gukesh puts the rook on d8. And now queen to e2. You'll notice from Magnus's time spent, he's not, I wouldn't say he's extremely comfortable here. He has to find a safe way to land the airplane, because if he doesn't, everybody dies. Spoiler. Rook d5. Bishop takes c6 now is the move. And a tough moment for Gukesh. He could split the pawn like this, but then this just becomes a target. And at some point, like, you know, this pawn is really going to fall, but probably bc was the way to go. I mean, I don't know. But Gukesh takes like this. And now, you know, his pawns stay together. Magnus just rock solid pawn to b3. But I just told you, it's very difficult to play for a not lose, you know, because now Gukesh is untangling and Magnus only has 9 minutes. Magnus Carlsen has 9 minutes to make 15 moves. What? Look at Gukesh. He figured it out. He put the bishop on the right square. He's just better now. He's just better now. I mean, you give me Magnus Carlsen in this position with black against Gukesh, I think he's going to find a way to win. Knight takes, take. Oh my goodness. The king is open, but e5 and g5 are covered. Look at this diagonal. This is a horrible situation for a person playing with an isolated pawn. This is a very difficult position for white. I mean, we're just lucky that it's Magnus Carlsen. He's probably going to, you know, effortlessly hold the game, but this is not a great position. Like, if this was the first game of their matchup, this would be a horrendous game for Magnus to start off with. But because he's playing for a not loss, Black has to find a way to win. Gukesh takes the file, and we have a tension. The rooks are having a staring contest. Magnus, by miracle, does not get checkmated in one move, and now the queens come off the board. And also, Magnus uses this A-pawn to try to break apart Black's structure in a way that he is going to win both of these pawns back. So we have take, take, and now rook takes d4, take, take. We hit the bishop. The bishop has to move. Now rook c7. And now we get in, and in all likelihood, these pawns are going to fall off. And that's exactly what happens. A4, take, take. Why did Magnus beeline for this position? Why did all the way back here Magnus say, you know what? I'm probably going to lose this pawn. But I think this is the drawing mechanism. All of this was foreseen. Why did Magnus do this? Knight versus bishop endgames separated by one pawn are likely draws if the pawns are all near each other. If one of these pawns was an outside pass pawn, it would be a dead loss position for white. Why? Because white is incapable of bringing forces to stop the pawn while also defending the rest of the position. But because all of these pawns are in the same area, do the math. 4 minus 3 is 1. 1 will be traded off into something, probably the knight. And at the end of the day, even rook and bishop versus rook is a draw. So even if at the end of the day, Magnus loses a knight for a pawn and no other pawns remain, he'll draw that game, but it probably won't even get there. And I got news for you. It doesn't. It's very difficult for Black to push this forward. He's doing his best, but look at what happens. It's a 3-on-2, but they're all like this. It's a damaged structure. White just sits back. It doesn't even matter that Gukesh pushes him backwards. You can't break through. The closest you're going to get is potentially getting your rook to g7. So for example, let's say Black plays rook g7, rook g3. I'm right there. So you don't, and if you try to do this, you'll actually lose. So rook b2, rook d3, and unfortunately, my friends, the story of Gukesh has come to an end at the World Cup 2023, and Magnus Carlsen has qualified to the semifinals. The future of chess will have to wait. But another crazy developing story here. Magnus Carlsen is not going to play the candidates tournament. Historically, the top 2 finishers in the World Chess Cup, in the Chess World Cup, made it to the candidates tournament, which is a tournament of 8 players, the winner of which challenges for the World Championship. This year, they said the top 3 finishers, so the winners and the top 2, and the bronze medalist, basically, the person that wins the match for 3rd and 4th place, which I'm not sure they've ever done this before. But Magnus is a semifinalist, and he's not playing. So that means the other 3 people make it, which means that technically in this World Cup, just winning the quarterfinals matchup, if Magnus made it, guaranteed you a spot. That's crazy. Well, let's find out who else is going to make the candidates. Now, they might play with the rules. I don't know. It's still a little bit weird. It's still all a little bit weird. Let's keep going. Yesterday, Vidit Gujarati, also of India, was pressuring Nijat Abasov, the last remaining local. There was 3 superstars. There's a lot of Azerbaijani players. It's in Azerbaijan, but there was 3 superstars, Mamedyarov, Rajabov, and Abasov. And Durar Bailey played as well. And yesterday, Vidit failed to win against Abasov. He put pressure, but unfortunately, well, or fortunately, depending on who you're rooting for, Abasov this game plays a London. Just a pure mainline London opening, e6, c3. This has all been seen before. Now pawn to h3, and now bishop d6. Vidit plays bishop e7, and after pawn to h3 plays bishop d6 because had he gone here right away, probably Abasov would have gone here and been able to defend himself with the h-pawn. But this is a very exotic approach. Bishop to d6, and now we have take, and just a very, very normal position. Just a boring 0-0-0 London. Here we go. Queen c2. Knight e5. Now, let's not forget, both of these guys have had great runs. Vidit just beat Nepomniachtchi, right? Nepomniachtchi. Abasov has beaten literally everybody. He just beat Salam Saleh. He beat Peter Svidler. He knocked out Nijigiri. Like, this dude's in good shape. Don't mess with this guy. Take, take. And yesterday, Vidit had a chance, but unfortunately, he was unable to convert it. So this is the opening position. Rook d1, and I mean, white has sort of just, developed his rooks, his knight, bishop, queen, and also the structure is a 4 and 2, and white has a 3-3, kind of like Battleship, right? 4-2, 3-3, or Chopsticks. You ever play that game? Where you whack each other like this? Not actually, but at this point, Vidit decides, I don't respect this guy, and I'm gonna try to beat him. Because Vidit could play this in a variety of different ways. He could do whatever he wants. But most of those things involve castling. He castles long. That is a declaration of hostility. You castle long in a chess game, you make the move, you press the clock, you write the move down, then you kick your opponent under the table. Maybe you cough aggressively at them. I'm not actually condoning this behavior. But the point is that now white brings the bishop back, setting up the rooks. Black puts the king on b8, getting the king out of the way, and now we're going to have a fight. Someone's going to lose. This is a heavyweight boxing match. Winner takes all. Winner moves to the semifinals, and I just said probably the candidates. It's a big moment here. Vidit could become the second Indian to make it to the candidates in this group, because this is, I mean, he was close yesterday, and then there's 4 remaining. Queen d2, queen c7. Abasov arrives with the horse. Vidit plays h6. Abasov begins with c4. Now, Vidit could have played a bit more aggressively, but it's a little bit tough for him. Like, h5 doesn't really do much. He plays h6. c4, pushing him back. Queen c3, setting up more pawn expansions and potentially targeting this pawn. Vidit defends himself. Here comes Abasov. Vidit knew that this was coming, because Vidit would not have castled queenside if he did not know this was coming. So now he begins neutering the white attack. He takes the rook and he offers a second rook trade. Without many pieces on the board, white is not going to be able to attack. But I got news for you. Abasov doesn't care about that. He's just caring about the expansion, because the expansion in and of itself is going to force Vidit to be passive. And I got news for you. Abasov has no interest in stopping. But why would Vidit invite all of this? He knew what he was getting himself into when he castled queenside. Abasov brings the knight back. Now, here's a move that I cannot explain for no amount of money. Vidit castled queenside, put his king to safety, and moved it back into the middle of the board. Clearly, he had an idea. I have no idea what it is. I've tried looking at this move. Maybe he wanted his king off this. I don't know. It's already a very tough position. Black could try to go for an endgame, but white wouldn't. White would not go for an endgame, and then I'm not really sure what you do. Maybe you start launching your own attack. Like king c8, it's going to have to happen at some point, probably. It's going to have to probably happen at some point. But he plays it now, and Abasov just keeps going. I mean, I told you. It was a heavyweight boxing match. Now Vidit tries to fight back. But take c5. I mean, my friends, this is... If any of you have my Middle Games Masterclass, it's one of my best courses. There's a chapter in there on attacks. Attacking on the same side, opposite side. This is one of the most perfectly executed opposite side castling attacks I have ever seen. He brought one pawn and his queen, and he literally... rook trade or no rook trade, just effortlessly expanded into his opponent's territory and completely stripped his king of defenses. Won a pawn, pushed his b-pawn, using the majority. And Vidit Gujarati, after 44 moves of action, loses, allows a checkmate. Very, very sportsmanlike of him not to resign, actually, and to allow the checkmate to his opponent. But sportsmanship doesn't get you to the candidates. And unfortunately, Vidit Gujarati's run has ended, and Nijat Abasov, hometown hero, is a semi-finalist moving on to play against Magnus Carlsen. Vidit, tragic, absolutely tragic exit. I mean, I feel for the guy. I'm a fan of Vidit. Not that I'm not a fan of Abasov. I just don't know Abasov all that well. Abasov now moves on to play Magnus Carlsen, and I got news for you. I don't think that match even matters. Like, Abasov could forfeit. I think because Magnus Carlsen is not playing in the candidates, I think Abasov is guaranteed a candidate spot. This is crazy. This is absolutely insane. You know what else is insane? The games that I'm about to show you. Yesterday, Arjun Erigaisi defeated Praggnanandhaa with the black pieces, just like Magnus beat Gukesh, and we saw how difficult it is to play for a win with black. It's so difficult, in fact, we have the exact same opening as the Magnus game, because the Alpine Sicilian is just... I mean, it's like, I don't know, eating ice cream that has no sugar in it. Like, you're just eating frozen... What even is that? You're weird. Like, live a little. Knight f3, knight c6. I know some of you are sugar-free, some of you might be diabetic, all right? Don't cancel me over ice cream and sugar. But, like, seriously, what are we even doing here? This one's a little bit different because Pragg plays knight f6. Gukesh played d5. So this one is a very, very well-known line. If you don't know this, don't worry about it. I will, both sides castle. Okay, terrific. So as we just saw in the game between Magnus and Gukesh, there was an isolated pawn. There's no isolated pawn here. It's a 4-4. It's a 2-2. How is black ever going to play this for a win? We just saw Gukesh completely be unable to, even though he was up a pawn. And I mean, look at Erigaisi. He just brings all the pieces to the middle. Pragg now has to do something. Knight d5. All right. Knight takes d5. Bishop takes d5. And Erigaisi just puts some pressure on the knight here. It's a very, very difficult position. Pragg plays queen b6, and Erigaisi just trades the knights, okay? And now tries to trade the bishops. I mean, this is what you do when you want your opponent not to beat you. Take, 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 take. Pragg wins a pawn. It's the best he can do, right? Now, if Erigaisi takes this pawn, removing the defense of this, Pragg can actually choose between taking this and this, and then Erigaisi is not going to get anything back there. So before he does that, he plays e6. He tries to smash through the black position with his pawn. Pragg plays queen f6, which actually does set up a threat there and on the bishop, and tries to get white to play this. This is the best move. And in this position, you have to find rook c1 with the intention of pressuring this and basically playing bishop e3, at which point one of these pawns will fall. And I mean, this is a handshake territory. Maybe rook f5, you still can't take. You go bishop e3, there's rook a5, so instead of bishop to e3, you play like pawn to a4 first. I mean, this is a very holdable position. Black really struggles here. But Erigaisi plays bishop e3, and Pragg says, you know what? Let's just do this. There's not much I can do. Pragg is up a pawn, just like Gukesh was, by the way. But Pragg's structure is even uglier. He has doubled isolated e-pawns. He has this stupid c-pawn. But what did I tell you? Remember how I told you Gukesh could not beat Magnus in that endgame because being a pawn up means nothing if they're all close together? I told you that, remember? Were you watching the recap? You still watching? I told you the outside pass pawn is really important in the endgame, which you could get in my endgames masterclass. All these little mini lessons, but in much more detailed form with like hundreds of exercises. But that's only if you want. Link is in the description though. Well, does black have a pawn that's an outside pass pawn? Does black have a pawn? Yes. Watch as Pragg creates winning chances for himself simply on the fact that the position is imbalanced from the standpoint of pawns. All of a sudden, the black king and the bishop and the rook are all marching together. Pawn to c5. Ain't no way, right? Ain't no way that this pawn is going to make it down here. Not with the white A pawn advancing, not with these idiots running, head first into each other's butts. Nothing can happen here. Black has absolutely no forward momentum. Look at white's pawn creeping. White's pawn is creeping 2 squares away from promotion, and the position is still equal. You're up a pawn, but the position is equal. That's how bad your position is. Pragg's not going to win this game. He tries to advance. His pawn's adorable. Pragg, this is so cute that you think, look, now your stupid c-pawn is blockaded. Pragg's got no chance. Wait a minute. Who's trying to win this game? Rook d7, king g3. Wait a minute. It's actually very difficult to move this pawn. Is white going to lose these pawns? Arjun plays here. And now Pragg plays c4 to try to deflect the king from the defense of this pawn, at which point he's just going to eat this and win. Erigaisi sends this into a rook endgame, but unfortunately, even though his pawn gets to a7, oh my goodness, Pragg, it's an avalanche. g4, g3, and my friends, we make it into a queen endgame. And remember I told you this c-pawn? I told you to keep an eye on that c-pawn. White now tries to make a draw by perpetual check, giving a check and a check and a check and running and running and running and running. My friends, this endgame was winnable for Pragg because it wasn't winnable for Gukesh. He had an outside pass pawn, and I told you that this game might end with the c-pawn, and I did not exaggerate because on move 75, Pawn to c1 was played queen, and Arjun Erigaisi resigned. Praggnanandhaa defeats Arjun Erigaisi with the black pieces. Close friends, roommates, hanging out with each other every day of the tournament. An absolutely insane result from Prague, and these two have to break their tie with a tiebreak. This is crazy. Fabiano Caruana said in an interview about this game that he would give himself less than 1% chance to win with black in this situation. And Prague did it. And speaking of Fabiano Caruana, I have a game to show you. Yesterday, Fabiano was dead. Was dead. The person who was with him at the tournament, if there was one, was packing the bags while watching the game. He survived. And that gives you a massive momentum boost. He is now playing with the white pieces. He plays in English. This game is a reverse, I don't even know what it is. It's kind of like a reverse Carlsen, because black doesn't have the e-pawn. It's like black is playing a Panov Carlsen. None of that matters though. Once again, isolated pawn position. We've seen that in this recap. So who wants to trade the pieces here? Who wants to trade the pieces? Fabi. Fabi wants to trade the pieces, play against this weakness. Linier wants to use the lines around the pawn, so bishop c5. Now, okay, that trade might benefit white. Bishop g2, knight c3, right? And now Fabi takes. He takes because if you play d takes e4, getting rid of your isolated pawn, white is going to have long-term pressure on this queen side. And that's kind of, I think, Fabi's idea. So we have this, pawn to e3, and basically Fabi just goes for this position and is like, look, isolated pawn, right? More pieces we trade, the bigger of a liability it becomes. Linier plays rook e4. The idea of rook e4 is that after knight takes, pawn takes, there's no isolated pawn anymore, which is why it's dead equal. Fabiano says, no, you can't have that. We're playing against the isolated pawn. Linier goes here, we have queen f3, and it's just a battle for the isolated pawn. Look at all the cannons pointed at the d4 square, trying to not let the pawn out of his sight. h3, slow improvement of the position, queen h5, rook d3, gently sliding up, rook d2, queen f3 looking for a moment, and now take. Every trade benefits the side playing against the isolated pawn. It's just a slow, methodical, torturous method of play. Rook c4, trying to trade the isolated pawn off and create a pawn on c4. Fabi says a4, no trade. Queen c6, until now. Why? Because after this, he's gonna take, and what matters in an endgame? Get the endgames masterclass. King activity, king f3, king e4, and king d5. And if you try to stop me, that's adorable, e4. And if you try to stop me, that's adorable, take, and now king f4, and you lose this pawn. You want to stop me this way? I have bishop d4, I have king e5, king d6, king c7. You're gonna lose. So Linier has to go here, and again, the isolated pawn, queen g4. Now, we use the isolated pawn, we blockade it, and we go for the king. So now Linier has to play defense. Check, here, king back, we take the pawn. Now Fabiano has won the isolated pawn, and he has a very powerful bishop. The queen bishop are a very nice combination. They work really well together. Queen and knight have all the powers combined, like the Deathly Hallows of Harry Potter, but it's not useful if you cannot coordinate them, and he can't. So now Fabi plays h4, all right? And he's going to try to bully Linier in this endgame. Queen takes a5, he wins a pawn. Now it's b pawns, and any bishop versus knight endgame is simply a loss, because white is going to create the... Very good. White is going to create the outside pass pawn after winning the b pawn. Now it's going to be, can Linier defend this position? Fabi pushing, trying to break apart the defenses, gives a check, takes away the light squares. Now the black king goes for a walk of shame into the center of the board, but you got to be really careful here, because if you lose this pawn's going to become a queen. Fabiano looking for a semifinals berth, and a semifinals berth probably means the candidates for Fabiano Caruana. Bishop takes b4 played. Knight takes b4 looks possible, but there's queen c4, queen b4, and then you are probably just winning the queen endgame. Linier plays queen f3, bishop here. The king is still in the center of the board. Now Fabi's winning all the pawns. Linier trying to create counterplay, but he loses the remaining pawn. Queen b3, and Fabi's going to win this game, not because of one pawn, not because of one pawn. Bishop and pawn versus knight is just a draw because you blockade on the light squares, but it's the 2 pawns. And Fabiano Caruana, it takes him over 90 moves, but it's a slow, methodical process. And on move 94 of this game, after coordinating his pieces and securing a queen trade, Linier Dominguez resigned to Fabiano, and Fabi made it to the semis. Fabi will take on the winner of Arjun Erigaisi versus Praggnanandhaa, which will be determined in a tiebreak tomorrow, August the 17th. Magnus Carlsen versus Nijat Abasov. And I think we know which 3 players make it to the candidates. I think. But I might be wrong. Get out of here.